believe in the ripple effect.
What's up? Another episode of Ripple Effect Podcast. Of course, I'm your host, Ricardo Rendes, also known as Rick Rendes, and a great episode for you today. Returning guest, journalist, author, researcher, and always a fascinating conversation. We have Philip Fairbanks, and today's podcast is about a really interesting story of this hitchhiker called Kai, and there's a trending documentary called The Hatchet Welding Hitchhiker, and if you haven't seen it, it is still on Netflix. It's trending. It's very popular. It's about a story I didn't know too much about. And weirdly enough, I just watched this documentary with my wife. Then a couple days later, I get an email from Philip talking about his new book, The True Story of Kai the Hitchhiker. So we get into all the things that Netflix documentary left out, what they're covering up and why they're covering it up, and much, much more. So please check out that documentary before you listen to this. But I'm pretty sure even if you haven't watched it, this will still be interesting because we get into all the details, and maybe watching a documentary might not even be necessary to enjoy this podcast and really get a good understanding of what happened. But this podcast is also a reminder of why I'm very skeptical of Netflix documentaries. Anytime you have a Netflix documentary about a conspiracy that many of us in the alternative media community have been talking about for a long time, like Jimmy Savile or Epstein, don't ever assume that's the whole story. There's always a lot left out. If it's on Netflix, they typically don't go all the way down the rabbit hole, and there's usually people they don't want to expose, so they'll leave a lot out. Before we get into this fascinating story, let me remind you, this is a value for value show. If you get some value out of these conversations, please consider giving some value back. It doesn't have to be financial. If you can't afford to financially support the show, don't worry about it. Subscribe to the show on all the platforms we're on. Rate, review, tell your friends about it, and that'll be more than enough support. If you can financially support the show, think about supporting us on a Patreon, or sending a one-time donation via PayPal or Venmo, or sending crypto to my crypto wallet, listening to us on Rockfin, because if you watch or listen to the Ripple Effect podcast on Rockfin supports the content creators by sending them crypto. You can also purchase my music, the Theory 6 solo music project. So if you like the intro song, go to any place where you can get digital downloads or stream music. Look up Theory 6, and the song's called The Ripple Effect. And of course, I have a couple sponsors, the University of Reason, created by Richard Grove, and the Autonomy courses. If you're at a crossroad in life, definitely check out the Autonomy courses and the University of Reason. Connect with that community. Also, Content Safe, which is how I get all my videos on all these video platforms I'm on. They save me tons of time with uploading. So if you're a content creator or you want somebody to build a website or protect your content, hit up Matt from Content Safe. Let him know you're a listener to the podcast, and he'll definitely hook you up. Another great sponsor of the show is Element Electrolytes, and it's a healthy way of staying hydrated. It's keto-friendly, fasting-friendly, made with only premium ingredients, and the formula was all scientifically put together and proven to give you the best performance mentally, physically, and it can help with so many of the symptoms that are due to dehydration, like headaches, fatigue, and many more. So use the links on my website, rippleeffectpodcast.com, or in the show description, and support the show if you can. Also check out our merch store, which you can find on our website, or you can go directly to the merch store by going to the Ripple Effect Podcast merch.com. We have hoodies, t-shirts, kids' clothes, and much more. So that's another great way of supporting the show. And if you want to connect with myself or listeners of the show, check out the Telegram group chat, also found on the website. Thanks, guys. Enjoy this amazing conversation. I'll see you on the next one. Peace.
Not too bad. I'm back in the U.S. now. That's a little bit of an adjustment, but apart from that, it's been good to see friends and family in Cleveland right now with a friend who he actually helped to design the book and wrote the afterword. So we've been getting a lot done on that front. Really thankful to have him and another guy who, like, professional designers and coders. They built the true story of Kai.com site and everything, and thankfully they are working for no money up front. So I'm going to make sure they get a cut out of sales. But yeah, I really thankful for the help there.
Well, the timing's perfect because when you emailed me, I just watched a documentary of my wife. So you typically, my wife works at a restaurant, and then Thursdays and Friday nights when she gets home late, I try to put the kids to bed before she gets home, so then we can have at least a little bit of time to have a glass of wine and watch something together. And we just it caught our eye, and it was I think it was trending on Netflix, and we're like, this seems interesting.
Huge.
And we watched. I never even heard anything about the story. I wasn't familiar with the story or any of the events of it. And then, but it all seemed like really suspicious. There's stuff that seemed missing. I remember telling my wife,
Uh-huh.
something doesn't seem right about this official narrative. And the thing about Netflix documentaries is that, they have ones on Epstein, they have ones on all these topics that somebody like you and I would find interesting. But typically I stray away from watching them on Netflix because I know they leave out the juicy parts, or they leave out.
Right. They're limited hangouts. I mean, what do you expect from, it's Bernays, the father of PR and propaganda. It's like one of his grandnephews or something is one of the co-founders. So, I mean, it's a propaganda outlet, sure. That, and another thing that I find kind of interesting is the fact that this is the second Netflix property that takes place in Union County, New Jersey. There was in 2022, The Watcher. That was another really big, and that's based on a true story in Westfield in Union County, New Jersey, the same place where this takes place. And apparently $850 million is how much Netflix bid and won for the Monmouth Army base, which they're going to turn into a film studio. So it's not surprising to me that they wouldn't cover the corruption and the bid rigging. Bid rigging is like a huge part of New Jersey municipal corruption. And so yeah, I was not very surprised that it didn't go into like any of Kai's defense, for instance. And what makes me angry is I know, okay, in my book in chapter 5, I talk about all kinds of like media coverage and whatnot and what they got wrong and everything. I don't know those journalists and YouTubers and whatnot. I don't know what they knew and what they didn't know. As for Raw TV in London, I was in contact with them. They contacted me. I didn't, go cold calling saying, "Hey, are you going to make a documentary on Kai? If so." No, they reached out to me. I don't know how they found my information. I guess, they'd been looking into Kai, saw some of my stuff, saw I'd done some interviews. They contacted me to license the material. And I was on the fence at first because, especially after they explained, I was like, well, if you're going to do this, and I'm explaining all this stuff that's fishy and, sending them file. Yeah. Like, here's the documents that prove this. This is like a really, it's a compelling story, corruption and cover up and, sexual predators in politics and in the judiciary in New Jersey. And there's a lot going on there. And then they said to me, they said, "Oh, is basically, well, we're gonna focus more on the virality and the viral incident, and what you're talking about. That would be a very different kind of documentary." I mean, like, I had no clue how different they meant, like, but stuff like, okay, they didn't mention once, for instance, Kai was in solitary confinement for 4.5 years, 23/7 lockdown. He didn't even get out of the single little box cell that he was in all day. 1 hour a day he got out of that little room, and he's still in isolation. It's still just him. After, like, I'm reading Alfred McCoy's book, Torture and Impunity. After like 2 to 3 days, the effects can be similar to mescaline. I was reading, which like made a lot of sense because I got arrested at 20. underage consumption. They put me in the drunk tank. I made the mistake of mentioning my full name, including the Arabic middle name, and so I got called a bunch of nasty racial slurs by the cops, and they put me in a drunk tank for 3 days. The light buzzing and no cot, and cold concrete, and on the third or fourth day, it was 3 or 4 days I was in there. And the third or fourth day, because everything runs together after a while when you don't know what time it is, um, I had, I call it an out of body experience. What it is, I'm realizing now after reading this book. Oh no, that whole like, where it felt like I was leaving my body and having a dream type. That was a psychotic break, and that's what. Also, they put him in solitary right before he was put on the witness stand when they finally did put him on trial in 2019. 6 years, like, and the Sixth Amendment, by the way, is not just the right to a speedy trial, which he was denied. He was also denied the right to, he wanted to represent himself. They wouldn't let him. So, there's just so much that they left out, and it didn't even scratch the surface. And knowing that they know better, like, it's absolute misrepresentation.
Well, what they wanted to do, they wanted to capitalize on his story. So the same way a lot of people use them as this viral, person. Nobody really cared about him as a person. They just cared about using his
what he could do for them. Yeah.
And so they wanted to capitalize on, this viral story to make a successful documentary. They didn't really care about making sure that it was they're representing him fairly or anything like that. And which was, there's a lot of just watching it. And now that you say that, you can tell that like they focus a lot on just him going viral. And quickly.
And a lot of the people they talk to, like, think about this, when you're filming a documentary, everybody they talk to, they probably have at least, 3 to 6, maybe more hours of footage, which means they spent like probably 8 to 12 hours with that person. Now think about that in comparison with how much time Lisa Samsky or the Mulcahy guy or like they probably spent about 8 to 16 hours total with Guy. And they're here telling his story and everything they feel about him. And it's like, you didn't know him. I've talked to people who did know him before the incident, and so they're out there. They didn't. I don't think they wanted to tell his story at all. Like, I can't say that they intentionally, like, I feel they've intentionally misrepresented him. I can't, I don't want to ascribe like motive to that, because I don't know. I mean, but yeah, I'm definitely like suffice it to say, now that the book's done, one of the things, there's several like rabbit holes I've got to go down afterwards that I didn't have time to fully explore. And one of those is going to be looking into, what palms had to be greased for that Monmouth deal, for instance. And if we do see any connections to some of the folks in Union County, I wouldn't be at all surprised, especially, like I said, just the two Netflix shows in like Union County, New Jersey. Like, I'd never heard of Union County, New Jersey before. So the fact that like there are two huge Netflix shows right around the time Netflix was bidding, I mean, I don't know. Once again, it could be nothing, but that's why, I at least want to look further through it. But yeah, they also didn't go into any of the, I've seen Rolling Stone and others.
Get into not to cut you off, sorry, but I just, before we get into, because I know you and I have both watched it, and we're a little bit more familiar with this.
Oh, right. Yeah. For folks that aren't familiar with the story. Yeah, sure. Like, to begin kind of at the beginning, I guess, it starts in February of 2013 when Caleb McGilvery, who goes by Kai Lawrence when he's on the road there, he gets picked up by this guy, Jet Simmons McBride. And this dude is, 6 foot tall, about 300 pounds. He's a big old dude. And, he has, by the way, now in the documentary, they make it out like, maybe he laced this joint and made this guy go crazy. But I'm glad I went over that in the book. No, if you actually read his trial, this guy, like, his family were concerned about him long before he met Kai. who he called the coolest son of a bitch and said he wanted to adopt him, before claiming that, oh no, he was the one that pushed the car into the guy. And but yeah, so Kai sees this, gets picked up by this guy. They smoke a joint. They're going down the road, and the guy tells him about how he raped a 14-year-old girl in the Virgin Islands, and then says he's come to realize that he's Jesus Christ and he can do anything. And he runs his car into Rayshawn Neely, who is a Pacific Gas and Electric worker. They're doing some road work, and he smashes his legs. Like, it could have killed this guy. That's why he was up for attempted murder. Nearly kills this guy. Then he jumps out of the car, and this woman's trying to help Rayshawn Neely, pinned by the car. And he runs out there and starts, trying to throttle her. So Kai jumps out. He's got a hatchet with him. He knocks him twice on the backside of the head. Now, mind you, at this same time, there are multiple people trying to subdue Jet McBride, and they are all failing. And 2 knocks to the head with the flat side did not do it either. And it must have been somewhat subdued to not kill him. That's another one of the things people get wrong. They think he killed that guy. He didn't. But yeah, no, it did take quite a bit to take this guy down. He was obviously in the midst of a psychotic break, which had been going on for a while, long before he met Kai. So from that, he does an interview with Jessa Brycebeck at KMPH. And that's the famous interview where, he talks smash, smash, smash. And, it was a huge viral hit, millions of views. He's covered all over the world. There's a fan page that's set up, Kai of Dogtown, on Facebook. And everywhere he goes, he's getting invites to hang out, have a free beer, crash on couches and whatnot. So it didn't seem all that odd when a 70-something-year-old lawyer approaches him when he's in Times Square. He's already been on the Kimmel Show. He's been mentioned on Colbert. He's all over, and he's used to people. Hey, it's the smash, smash, smash guy. So this guy says, "Hey, you look lost," and offers to take him back. And he's in Times Square. He was already heading to New Jersey to see a fan, Kim Conley, and so yeah, sure, he goes back with the guy. They go over, they have some beers and some burgers. The last thing he remembers is the last beer he pours into a mug, and it's a dark beer, and it tasted really bitter. And that's about it. He passes out. I remember him saying the last thing he remembered was hearing the Jeopardy theme song, which that always sticks with me for some reason. So he passes out. The next day he wakes up. You ever you get some saliva on your lip and it's gross and it's dried and it's and then there's a wet spot on the it happens, especially if my nose is stopped up. That happens, right? So he wakes up, he feels something, it's gross, okay, whatever. Now on the CCTV video, you see them at the train station, and Kai, he's got a toothbrush in his mouth and he's doing this number. I think that the reason for that is, he mentioned the next day as well, when he was allegedly drugged and raped, about a bitter taste. And apparently there's what's called the Z drugs, Ambien and Lunesta, Zopiclone, S-Zopiclone, Zolpidem. These drugs, they have a lot in common. They work on the benzodiazepine route, and they can cause blackouts, and they can cause what's called automatism, which, you remember when Ambien, when Roseanne was sleep tweeting on Ambien, people, it's not just sleep tweeting. People will do the dishes. People have driven cars while in a blackout. Technically their brain, if you did an EKG or whatever, they're sleeping, but their eyes are open and they're driving. They're doing complex, so in between, him talking about the blackout state and the bitter taste, I do believe that it was that was at least one of the things that Galfi may have used. So the second night, he's supposed to stay with another friend who he came down to New Jersey to see. Something falls through, and so he contacts Galfi again. Galfi picks him up. They go back to his place. It's pretty much similar to the night before, watching TV, drinking beers, eating, and once again, there's a dark beer that's poured into a glass is the last thing that's drunk. And the next thing he remembers is waking up in Galfy's bedroom. And this is what kills me too. There's so much, like when people say, well, why, how come Kai didn't just like prove his story? That's one of the most frustrating things. Is the best we can do is by seeing what evidence was there, what wasn't collected, what was collected but not tested. Like when you see that, the mugs, we should have tested those for, there should have been a tox screen run. Well, it's too bad they got run in the dishwasher or somewhere in between the May 13th and May 16th Union County Prosecutor's Office investigative reports. A dishwasher was run, and so all they did was fume them for prints. And another thing, Joseph Galfy's brother is James Galfy, who's a former deputy chief of police of Irvington, New Jersey. In his interview, which, by the way, if you go to truestoryofkai.com, up in the corner, evidence locker, that link will take you to a cloud drive with all the stuff that I cite and reference in the book and in notes, because I don't want anybody to take my word for it. It's all right there. You can see where it shows that yes, semen and blood were found in the underwear of Joseph Galfy. They didn't test. They didn't do further tests on the semen because there weren't enough spermatozoa, aerosomal heads, or however the term they put it. Which, by the way, there's another thing. Well, what can we deduce from that reasonably, though? Which one of the two of them, the 73-year-old man or the 25-year-old man, which is more likely to not have enough sperm heads to count, to test? So yeah, there's, the blood apparently was never tested. If you allege someone is a rapist and they have semen and blood on in their underwear and on their penis, I think that should be tested. So there was so much that, like, there's evidence of a cover up, but we can't quite prove a lot of the things because of that. Now, luckily, this is another thing that the documentary leaves out. July 28th of last year, I did an article for City University of New York's graduate paper Advocate, just a few weeks before this. So I wasn't able to mention it there, but I did, update that in the book. July 28th, 2022, federal judge, Madam Cox-Arleo, ruled that Kai had, quote, sufficiently alleged at this early stage a conspiracy among the moving defendants, and that's like the Union County Prosecutor's Office and the cops and whatnot, to deprive him of his due process rights. Now, this is one of the reasons why this case has made me just absolutely hate the law. So it's a mulligan, right? So we proved that, they deprived him of his due process and that he didn't get a fair trial, so he gets a do-over or something, right? Like that's how it should work, right? No. See, the problem is the Title 1983, that's a federal thing, and so the federal thing, we can't do anything about these civil motions until the state, the murder conviction is vacated. He's either exonerated or serves 85% of a 57-year sentence. It's a catch-22.
Well, the thing that was frustrating about the documentary is you have a judge, okay, a older man who lives by himself, and this guy obviously knows what criminals look like. He knows that people can drug people, they can rob people, he takes just so he's aware of this stuff, and he takes just a person who is a hitchhiker who was lost into his home, okay, a younger man who could, obviously, if he, I don't know if he claimed to know that he was Kai or not. Did he know? I can't remember if they.
The thing about, like, see, that's another thing. Okay, so the neighbors talk about how he had a longtime live-in partner they called the houseboy. His brother and Andy Barron, one of his few close friends and business associates, both mention how he made every weekend he would go down to Times Square. Before Kai was a suspect, James Galfy was questioned. They asked him, who do you think might have done something like this? And he brings up, this is kind of odd. He brings up some kind of a vagrant guy from 1975 or 74 at their parents' lake house. Why would you bring up some vagrant from 40 years ago? You think the guy held a grudge? Oh, or maybe there wasn't the one vagrant guy. Maybe he had a pattern of picking up homeless people. And I compare him to Ed Buck in some ways. I'm not, when I do so, I want to make it clear. I'm not saying I think that this guy necessarily killed anybody, but the idea of, a wealthy, politically connected guy who wants to prey on homeless people, like, yeah, we've already proven that can be pulled off pretty easy. Remember Ed Buck, like the second, not the third guy, because it was the third person that he murdered, the third that we know of. I believe there were likely more. But like when the second guy died and the cops came in and they're like, they opened the door. Oh, look, it's an obvious drug den with syringes laying around and a dead black man. Oh, he's homeless and this guy has pictures with Hillary. Okay, never mind. And they just let him do it again. And he did it again, you know? And in fact, if I recall, I don't want to get the, verify this. Don't just take my word for it because it's been a while since I looked into this. But I think the third guy, he wasn't as like, he wasn't complete, like, he had a job and he had people who would miss him and note. And that's probably why the third guy finally got Ed Buck charged, because he wasn't completely off the grid. He did have people who would miss him when he went missing. So the in between the some kind of vagrant thing and the frequent trips to that's another thing. Kai wanted to bring this up in court, but the judge wouldn't let him. The fact that the mayor of Clark actually brought this up. This is why I know it. Kai had pointed it out, but the reference is a newspaper story where the mayor in Clark, New Jersey, in Union County, there talks about how Galfie was a big fan of vacationing in Thailand, and I want to be sure to say, like, hey, I lived in Manila for years. Southeast Asia is beautiful, but it's when you add that to the, like, the stuff that makes him look like a literal, sex predator, a serial sex predator. And which, speaking of that, that's another thing that I guess we should get into. I've got a whole chapter. This blew my mind. And a lot of the biggest revelations in this book, Kai is the investigative journalist. This, he from prison, amidst, fighting off an army of lawyers, not just lawyers, but like dead rich lawyers, estate lawyers, and the Union County prosecutor's office's lawyer. Like, he's not just fighting off lawyers, he's fighting off lawyers, and it took 9 years to put things in just the right words. But I really do hope that, like, that's a sign of things to come. But yeah, there's something going on in New Jersey, because he discovered through use of the law library, he gave me a list of names. I added maybe one or two to it. But he found the bulk of them that I was able to find anyways. We've got all these predators, child sex predators in many cases. And let me find the quote, because they call it the bright line rule. Here we go. This is New Jersey Supreme Court precedent in the case Enri Legato 229, New Jersey, and this is at line 182. The court refrains from establishing a bright line rule requiring disbarment in all cases involving sexual offenses against children. Why would you make it a precedent that, all he did was rape a kid? Well, he can still be a lawyer. He can still be a judge. He can still be, and they're not just lawyers. In one case was a councilman. One case was assistant or a deputy attorney general. We got DAs, we got prosecutors, we got public defenders. In one case, a pervert judge and his child rapist son. And most of these cases, unless it's a federal investigation, what happens generally is they get 6 months suspension from the bar. They get sentenced to therapy. Then there's no write-up in the paper. The only stories that are in the paper is when it's a federal case. The only cases where somebody goes to prison or jail, it's a federal case. Almost like in 99% of these cases, that is the situation, which shows me that, like, once it gets kicked up to the feds, there's nothing they can do. But as long as it stays on the home court, New Jersey is perfectly fine with lawyer predators, with politician predators. And in fact, they have adjusted the Supreme Court precedent to make sure that New Jersey is a welcoming home for predators. That's another thing. A couple of these folks were predators in other states and then got disbarred there, and then did it again in New Jersey. Like, I mean, you're inviting that upon yourself, though, when you create like, listen, let's, sex crimes against children. Come on, I mean, like, just let him be a lawyer still. It's people like that, though. That's something that Kai brings up. We definitely need to be vigilant about people in positions of public trust, because even if you don't want to be concerned about, like, the fact that children are being harmed, there's the fact that these people are obviously very highly blackmailable. They're perfect targets for honeypots and whatnot. So for that reason alone, even if you can twist your head around, well, actually, that doesn't affect their ability to do their job. Yes, it also affects their ability to do their job. So yeah, I mean, like, in between, like, some of the things I heard Galfie's brother say, the obvious signs of assault, the fact that apparently it was pretty easy to get a cover up going for Galfie. I would, I don't have evidence that he's done this before, but I also, I do believe that he did it. And I don't think that this is the kind of thing that at 73 you just decide, I'm going to start bringing hitchhikers home and drugging and raping them. That's not something, like I said, I think it goes back at least to the 70s.
Yeah, the whole story's insane. And there's a great documentary called What Happened in Vegas, which I thought was going to focus on the Vegas shooting, but it kind of goes into more about the corruption of the Vegas police and attorneys and all that stuff. And so it kind of shows you, instead of focusing on the shooting, it tells you, well, you're never going to uncover what really happened because the people doing the investigation are just as corrupt and have a checkered past. So it kind of reminds me of that. Yeah, New Jersey's same thing. I mean, known as being a very corrupt place. And it just, you hear stories like this over and over again. I mean, look at the Memphis Five, right? I mean, it took Pearl Jam and a bunch of other people to protest for them to finally get them out. Because sometimes once a attorney or a police officer is convinced that you're the one who should be locked up,
Oh yeah.
that there's not much you can do. I mean, it's your word against their word, and they are the ones who are holding the evidence and investigating the evidence and looking for the evidence, so they can pick and choose what they want to, show the world and what they don't, and what they want to suppress. And you were talking about him being in isolation. I actually, when I knew that we were going to do this podcast, I looked up if there's any recent interviews with him, and I found one that it wasn't too recent, but I don't know if
the Inside Edition one, I think like 2019 or so. Yeah.
and you could tell that he was messed up. And I remember the Memphis Five seeing an interview with one of them when they finally got released, and he talked about how he lost his ability to see things at a far distance because he was stuck in this little cell.
Oh, wow.
And he, when your eyes only are looking at things that are right in front of you, it's no different than
Right.
a kid who's always on a tablet or adult who's always on a computer. What happens is your eyes get used to only seeing things close to you, that you almost lose your ability to see things at a distance. And he also forgot how to use silverware and fork and knife because they'd only give him his food. They wouldn't give him any silverware. He had to use his hands to eat. So all these like psychological things, he had to like learn how to do all over again when he got out of prison. And so when I saw him on the Inside Edition interview, like I thought about that. I'm like, okay, he looks like he's, a mess. But obviously, like you said, you get locked up like that for that long. How are you not a mess? How do you?
Regression, all kinds of stuff goes on.
But I also wanted to ask you what your opinion on his childhood, right? Because I mean, he's from.
Oh my gosh.
He said something
Yeah.
about how he didn't call the police when this happened. And again, like I want people to watch the documentary. You'll be
Mhm.
stunned how little of the time in this documentary they talk about the most interesting part, which is this,
Yeah.
this murder or whatever happened with this judge, and how little investigation they go into, Kai's side of the story and anything that would, defend his side of the story at all. Like they don't need to really entertain that at all. It's like he's locked up, he's as guilty. And it's really like this, they almost paint this picture of like, look at this guy who everybody fell in love with because he was a hitchhiker who saved a woman. And and this video of him talking about saving this woman and why he did it goes viral. And then look how, what he turned into, and it's like,
Yeah.
and again, like when a judge is picking up hitchhikers, like this is somebody who has money. And I mean, I know people locally who live in my town who are attorneys, and they won't go to bars, where people get too drunk, or they're always worried about their appearance, right? They're always worried
Mhm.
about like, oh, people know me. I'm a very professional person who runs who has a very important job, and I don't want people to question my character. So I don't want to hang out with drunks, or I don't want to be too drunk in public, or I don't want to, be hanging out with anybody that makes my character look bad. And so like the fact that this judge is picking up hitchhikers and just inviting him to his house. And again, like if people haven't checked out Philip's other books and some of his other work, like the Pedo Primer, a great book. Definitely check it out. I'll put links in the show description so people can check that out. And it talks about pedophilia and politics. But by now, with the Jeffrey Epstein story becoming public and Jimmy Savile and all these other things that hopefully would open people's eyes to the fact that this stuff really does happen. I mean, look at just yesterday. I was in the office doing some work, and every once in a while I'll throw on like InfoWars just to see what Alex Jones is talking about or who is he interviewing. Because I mean, like him or not, he definitely does interview some people I've never heard of that are good researchers or whatever. And he had a bunch of images of the Podesta artwork and his brother's artwork, and
Mhm.
this is the first time I've seen some of them, and I've seen a lot of them, but he was showing a bunch of them yesterday. And I'm looking at that stuff. And I'm like, oh my God, I forgot how effing disturbing these images are. And how can
Yeah.
somebody have this stuff in the like on the walls for like guests to come home?
Yeah, in
Look
your
out.
house, having to see that every day yourself,
I know.
and paying like $1 million for like I'm just gonna drape my house with like paintings of abused children hanging from, yeah, it's
Pictures are
terrible.
super like disturbing, and there's no way. And the Podesta was of people just kind of dismiss him, but like this guy was intertwined in politics for a long time with a lot of important people, and maybe he wasn't a household name until the Clinton email things, but in the political world he was a household name. He was somebody who knew people, had a lot of influence. And for this guy to have these images, and I know everybody dismisses Pizzagate. It's like you bring it up and it's like, oh, Pizzagate, that's been debunked. And it's like, kind of. I mean, but
Yeah,
like,
there's like the problem with Pizzagate is there's so much misinformation. Like I think there's a lot that's not confirmed, but like that heavy breathing band, and like there's enough there in the Instagram, there's enough there that it's like, okay, jokes or not, this is not appropriate if you're running a family joint with kids in it. You don't make jokes like that and have a place where you bring kids, and you don't like, duct tape, not as a joke, duct tape. Yeah, no, you don't make sexual jokes about kids that involve real life kids being like duct taped or whatever they were doing. No. So yeah, I don't know what all it was, but it was definitely a bunch of, rich, connected, gross, weird pervs and pedos, at the very least.
you see it in Hollywood, you see it in fashion. With Nygaard, right? That guy, they did
Mhm.
some series on him. You see it everywhere. And I mean, I was talking to somebody recently about a local Portuguese church which my parents belong to, and they were talking about how like in the 80s, or it was like I came to this country in 85. I was born in Portugal, came to this country in 85. So or no, I was born in 85. I came here a couple 4 years later. I came here when I was 4. And like they were talking about, so roughly around that time, he's like, "Oh, you weren't here. You might have not been in the country yet." But there was like a scandal about a priest that was moved around and came to our local town, and then he was doing some stuff. But he was this guy I was talking to. He's a friend of the family. I know his kids or whatnot, and he was saying how like back then people had such respect for for a priest, and that nobody would talk, nobody would say anything. People would know there'd be whispers, but nobody is like, you don't say anything. You just let it go. Even if you see him out, you see him do something you shouldn't see, people would just kind of mind their own business, not say anything. And that's kind of like, like Hollywood and politics and everything else, where just like people kind of know what's going on and there's whispers. And that's why it's always when somebody gets arrested that people start publicly kind of sharing their thoughts. It's like, oh yeah, we heard some whispers about Bill Cosby. Oh, we heard some whispers about Weinstein. We heard some whispers about but it's like nobody says anything until it's like safe to say something, and then they're like, okay, now I can talk about it. So it's like this stuff is happening everywhere, and that's the scary part. It's like how often and how common this stuff is scary, and it's a rabbit hole that people don't want to go down. It's scary to think that there's, I mean, even locally, the last couple of years, there's stories of people, of people who live in my town that have been locked up for things that I'm like, okay, that's kind of weird. I never would have thought of him of that way. It's like, oh, that's crazy. It's like there's I heard this story on Rogan's podcast recently, and I don't know who was telling it, but he was talking about how there's this police officer who lived in like this little town, and when he became a police officer, he went from thinking like, oh, this is a small little town with a lot of good people and good families and all this stuff, and he's like, all of a sudden I'm getting called to domestics I'm investigating a possible rape or molestation or whatever. And he's like, this little town that I was in the outside looking in, thinking I knew what was going on between these four doors of everybody's homes. I didn't know shit. And all of a sudden my perspective on, what's really goes on in people's houses and their homes and who they really are completely and drastically changes. And that's kind of like why I think people, even though the Epstein thing became public and all these things became public, and you think it would change the mainstream narrative on like, okay, how common is this? How, is this a serious problem or is this an isolated problem? And, but yet it's almost like we want to be the police officer before he's a police officer. Like ignorance is bliss. Like I'd rather believe this stuff isn't happening everywhere because it's easier for me to cope with things than realize how much evil there really is out there. And that's the thing, like a lot of these things, there's not the Pizzagate thing. It's like there's no real evidence. Like nobody got arrested with like children in a van or whatever in regards to that pizzeria, but there's a lot of weird stuff there. And and you can, like, no average person can look at all that imagery and artwork and all the other weird things that surround that stuff and think like this is completely normal, because it's put it on. Would you put it on your social media account? Absolutely not. So if that tells you something, and you're a well-known business owner who's connected all, and you're doing this stuff, it's almost like it's accepted in the community,
right? Yeah, like, and let's say they were just LARPing as pedophiles the whole time. It was just a funny inside joke. It reminds me of Kurt Vonnegut's Mother Night, where like the U.S. military guy, and he's in Germany, and he's pretending to be a Nazi radio host, but he's actually sending coded messages back to the Allies. But then afterwards, they have to deny the existence of that. But the point being, like, if you pretend to be something 24/7, are you pretending? So the question of whether they were just like, constantly because the stuff on that Instagram that was verified, that was really their Instagram. Those were real pictures. Those were real, they weren't. And you can argue, oh, well, they were kidding. Those were jokes. Well, it's absolutely inappropriate for somebody who runs a family establishment. That's all there is to that then. So yeah, I mean, I don't know what is and what isn't there. And like I said, it's frustrating for the same reason like with the Kai case. It's like we can see evidence that something's wrong, but not the evidence that proves exactly what that thing is, like exactly what's going on. Yeah.
Well, the other thing too is Kai was very famous and he had groupies and everybody wanted to party with him. Like, why would he, out of all the people he would hook up with, why would he hook up with a 72-year-old judge, old guy, like,
Right.
he did, it just seems kind of unusual because he was quite famous at the time. And
And the prosecution never offered a motive either. In the grand jury, they mention it briefly that they're not obligated to provide a motive because we know it wasn't theft because like according to the Galfi last will and estate, he had gold coins, he had a lot of untraceable cash, put it to you that way, untraceable cash all over. And Kai didn't even so much as, pull a bill out of his wallet. Like the money was still in his wallet, So there was no theft. There was no motive was ever given other than I'm tired of being famous and beloved. I want to throw my life away. I just don't buy that.
yeah, and the brushing the teeth thing, I'm glad that you mentioned that because that was something that stuck out in the documentary when I'm like, like, so he was raped and, he talks about, kind of and he describes in detail some things sexually that, we don't have to get into now, but it seems like it would make sense that he was trying to get the taste out of his mouth and that
Mm-hmm.
he thought something gross might have happened. And he's not a guy who seemed to care too much about hygiene or appearance. So it's like, why else would he be brushing his teeth? You know, uh,
Just in the middle of the day too. Yeah,
you know,
and people, what I see over. Why would he go back if he knew? Well, because he didn't know. People are confused over the timing. Like, okay, after the fact, have you ever had one of those things where, like, then after the fact, you're like, oh, that's what that other thing from a day ago was? So, yeah, that whole bit with the whatever on his, when he mentions that, people get confused and they think, oh, so you knew you were raped that morning and you went back. No, I don't believe he did. And that being said, here's another thing that people, may not realize, especially in my early 20s and whatnot, and late teens, 18, 19, 20, up into my mid 20s, pretty much. I had a very prodigal past. I ran with the wrong people. I got into the wrong things. And you end up sometimes, I've been homeless before. I have slept at places where I knew it wasn't safe, but it was the best bad like sometimes you have to make the best bad choice. And, so no, I don't believe that he knew, but as far as if he felt, Galfi was shady or not, he might have. He'd apparently already like kind of like started out of the blue. It wasn't like there wasn't any like flirting or build up, like he just asked him like to take a shower with him and he's like, no, no, thanks. Um, so but yeah, I don't know. I definitely believe though that, like I said, um the investigators, the documentary makers, the media, like everybody let Kai down. The system in Canada when he was a kid, like all through on down the line, which it's a really tragic story. This is something that I want to bring up though. I find this really inspiring. Kai honestly does inspire me. Um, initially, what one title idea was going to be Smash, Smash, Smash: The Tragic Tale of Kai the Hitchhiker. And I shared the drafts with Kai, and he told me he didn't like the title, and I'm like, huh, well, why? And this actually made a lot of sense in hindsight. There are a lot of tragic aspects to his story, but if if you minimize it to nothing but a tragic story, you're erasing all the inspiration, overcoming, he's been through a lot and he's not been crushed by it. That alone, is an amazing feat. Um, So yeah, I mean, like I do definitely hope though that as popular as this Netflix doc is, if only a portion of the people, I hope it backfires. Honestly, I hope that their maybe limited hangout or whatever it is backfires on them, and that this renewed interest and resurgence of interest leads to people finding out the rest of the story. The Paul Harvey on this bit, because I mean, get down to brass tacks, it's even a more interesting story than the one that Netflix was talking. I don't really care about Lisa Samsky and the Kardashians and some guy who is a people wrangler, a people procurer for Jimmy Kimmel. I don't care about them. They don't know Kai. They don't know, they haven't kept up with Kai. Another thing I definitely want to mention briefly, at least, by the way, Jessup Riceback, the guy that did the initial interview, they put him front and center in the doc, which I thought was a good thing, except for the fact that when you put him up in the front and you surround him by these like media weasels, the dregs, these vultures, like I've seen so many people like bad mouthing him and saying awful things to him on his social media, which is really unfair, especially when okay, Kai is still in touch with Jessup. Kai got Jessup in touch with me. We're in touch. He was one of the first Indiegogo sponsors of the book. He cares about Kai and he cares about Kai's story, and he's been there for Kai and in contact with him. All those other folks, they did only spend 8 to 16 hours or whatever. But, Jessup has been there for the long haul. So yeah, I think that the documentary kind of did him dirty too, because it did it like it presented him, and when you have this one guy and then he's surrounded by like this one media guy and then surrounded by media vultures, I can I guess get I maybe shouldn't say this, but I'm gonna. We were emailing about this, and I was telling him I felt bad about that and how I try to say, and you know what he says? Listen to this, and he's like, well, I'm glad that they're showing interest in Kai's case, and Kai knows, and that's what matters. Do not, you people don't pick, leave Jessup alone. Like that just like pulled on my heartstrings there too. Like that's the perfect perspective too, by the way. Like, yeah, both he and Kai. And I'm not saying they're heroes or they're perfect. I'm certainly not myself either. I don't want to be put on a pedestal, Then you'd start seeing all my nose hairs from down below me, So yeah, I'm not saying that Kai is a hero. Kai did a heroic thing, yes. Does Kai have a good character? Yes, I believe so. Same with Jessup, but we're all just people, I don't know that there are like good guys, I think there are people who try to be decent and fail, and the degrees to which they fail is different, and then there's people who don't try to be decent. Like,
Yeah,
so
that we don't even have to prove that Kai's a great guy or even a good guy for this to be.
yeah, nobody deserved exactly. If he had like, woke up that morning and was like, I wanna, smash an old guy's face or whatever, like you still get the basic protections of the Constitution. You still have due process. You still can't be subject to cruel and unusual punishment like nearly 5 years of solitary. Um, but yeah, that is an important point to bring up. Absolutely. Like it doesn't matter if he was innocent or not. You don't treat people like this in a supposedly free country or whatever. The
And I was just gonna say, and even if he, it sounds like people who are close to him, who are honest about their interactions with him, that they say that he seems to be a decent guy, and he is a nice guy. And I mean, I know in the documentary when they were talking about trying to get him money, and he just didn't seem interested at all. Is another one of those things that makes you think like, okay, well, he's not hanging out with a judge because he cares about about money and trying to steal something or what.
Oh, it was a lawyer, by the way. Sorry.
Oh,
But yeah, exactly. He was not a materialistic guy. He could have, if he was a different sort of person, he would be a multimillionaire right now, at least a multimillionaire. He might be Kardashian rich if he'd really, really wanted to, and put like, because I believe, he's a bright kid. Like, I've read his civil motions. He was able to take down like an army of lawyers. He's an incredibly bright kid. He's got an amazing sense of will, insurmountable sense of will. So, if he'd wanted to just be rich, he would, he could have been. So yeah, like, and that too, I think is definitely a sign of his character. Yeah.
And so two things, because I completely derailed us big time. But
Oh, no worries.
I was initially gonna we were gonna talk about a little bit about his childhood, about your opinions on his being locked in a room and some of the things, maybe some of the trauma he was dealing with in childhood. And then I also wanted to know your opinion on his face tattoo. What because that kind of came out of nowhere in the
Yeah.
I'm just like, why would he do that? Like, what, was he just I mean, I know plenty of people who just drank too much or
Mhm.
at a party and did too many drugs, and next thing you know, they want to go get a tattoo. So I guess it's not out of the realm of possibility that that could have been the case, but I wanted to
I
get.
think in it for this one, like, and I would have to look it up, but like, there's a whole, like, it doesn't seem like just a whim kind of thing, because like he had a whole, like, explanation of what the different elements are and the whole bit. um I do think, like, and I can't speak for Kai. I may I probably ask him, though. This would be something I'm interested, now that you mention it. Like, if it had anything to do with, like, like the same thing with the name, like changing his name to Kai. I know for me, for instance, like, if I'm changing my life in some big way, I will also sometimes, like, I'll either grow a beard or shave a beard. I'll cut my hair, grow my hair. Because, like, I don't know, there's, like, when I enter a new chapter, it's sometimes like, if you do something, if you change your appearance or whatever, change your diet, there's all kinds of things that you can do that sort of, so like I said, I can't speak for Kai, but I do wonder if maybe he was, working on starting a new, like, phase of sorts. Because and this is another thing, definitely want to make sure to ask him, like, that's something I saw in the documentary that I hadn't really thought of. Like, it had to have gotten old sometimes, you know, being the smash, smash, smash guy. And then everywhere you go, and people are just like, and maybe you don't feel like, just being the happy go lucky hero right now. Maybe you got stuff on your mind, but you still got to smile. And, otherwise you're going to go viral again because you were rude to to a fan, like that, I don't know. I have a feeling that, that might have at least gotten old a little bit. By the way, speaking of the tattoo, that's another thing that blows my mind. They want to claim that he cut his hair to change his appearance to make it easier to be on the run as a world famous person. But like, his face tattoo, there was already a picture of him with his hair over to the side and prominently displaying. So now it's even more prominently displayed. Keeping the hair would have covered that. But yeah, another thing that's important to mention related to that, by the way, speaking of the CCTV cameras there at the train station, they say that he cut his hair, but they ignore the fact that hairs that are not gray, that were the color of Kai's hair, short hairs, were found in Galfie's car. And they're also, I've got it in the book, and once again, evidence locker at truestoryofkai.com. You can see the crime scene photos, and you can see there's short hairs mashed up into the mattress, short, dark hairs. So, it's like, it's obvious that his hair was already cut. Not only that, but the part that really gets me is where, speaking of destroyed or mismanaged or tampered with evidence, the CCTV cameras at the Rahway train station, they were like, see, he's got long hair. And then they show him walking off. And then there's a 4-hour gap, and we don't see Kai anymore. And they said they lost that footage. Now, Kai says he came back and cut his hair, and that it should be on there. But I don't know. We accidentally lost 4 hours of the CCTV footage, specifically in the spot where Kai's story would, like, if it was just, now I get it, the Keystone Cops, one of their first movies was filmed in New Jersey, but like, why is it only the evidence that would exonerate Kai that accidentally Just, whoa, we forgot. Oh, it accidentally got deleted. Whoops, we ran the dishwasher, you know. But yeah, what was the other thing you were asking there?
And the other thing was about your opinions on his childhood trauma.
Oh, wow. Yeah. That's another thing that they didn't go into hardly. Um, I found it, okay. I'm glad they had his mom in it for one reason. She's an awful liar. And I don't think anybody fell for that. Like, also the juxtaposition between, his cousin saying, yeah, I feel sorry for Caleb. His mom would lock him in a room. She tried to do that to me too when I went over there, which, number one, that shows you that the story is true. Number two, that it wasn't, well, Kai was just rambunctious. No, you just want to lock everybody up, apparently. But and then they shoot to her, and she's like, "Well, I didn't lock him in a room. I just had to make sure he couldn't leave the room sometimes. So to be a responsible parent."
Yeah, that
It's like, basic classic abuser minimizer. Like, I didn't do that, but if I did that, here's why I did that, and it was justified.
yeah, that whole part was like really I was really suspicious about her.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, it sounds like you're admitting you did that while almost like trying to say that you didn't do it at the same time. And it's yeah, it was wild because I'm like, there's no justification for that. You don't deal with your child by
Yeah.
in a room. I mean, that's trauma.
Like what? Especially a very small child. It's like, how do they use the restroom even? You know?
or how
Yeah.
that they're
Yeah.
really scared or they're not. I've done shows with she was I think she retired now, but she was a professor of psychology at Notre Dame, and she's done a lot of books on childhood trauma and nurturing and all the like the basically primal parenting, like, but parenting like our primal ancestors, because they basically had it right and we've messed it all up, and how you can't hold a child enough, and how we think like it's okay to let kids cry it out, but there's like actual good data and studies that show that it causes psychological issues and
Mm.
all these so it's like a lot of things as an adult you think like, okay, not a big deal, but you have to put yourself in the child's perspective, and that's something even as a parent I constantly attempt to do. It's like, okay, I remember when I wanted to go play basketball, and it was maybe we're 30 minutes before dinner, or hour before dinner, or whatever. My mother would say, no, you can't, dinner's going to be soon, whatever. And I would think that it was like the worst thing that ever happened. And and it was like my mother, maybe all my friends were going there, maybe there was a cute girl that I liked that was there and I wanted to see her, whatever. But like she was seeing it from her perspective, where it's just like it's not a big deal, and I was seeing it from my perspective where it was like life ending. And that's like, little, just as a little example of like how often we parents struggle to remember that, like, maybe something that isn't a big deal to you, that's
Well, like through our developmental period, we learn how to control, like gain control of ourselves. Like we're not born able to walk. We're not born able to control our motor skills. We're also not born able to control our emotions. And we don't understand why we can't control our emotions either. Like, our brain is not developed, and we don't have, like, it must be like, I think about that sometimes. It must be really confusing and scary to be a kid sometimes. Cause, like when you think about, like, an hour doesn't seem long, but it does if it's like, like if you're like 5 years old, an hour is a sizable percentage of the existence that you've had thus far, compared to like a 40-year-old guy like me. But yeah, so
the other.
definitely people don't realize that even little things can be huge to kids. But yeah, what was going on in Kai's situation? It wasn't just his mom either. His dad and his dad's girlfriend. Oh, speaking of my first book, Pedogate Primer, I mentioned, the Children of God, the Family International cult. His mom, this blew my mind. Like, I swear it was like there were IRL plot twists when I was writing this book, where it was just like, wait, what? So like, at one point I discover, looking up this guy John Guslavage, and I find out about the Family, which is a cop gang in Elizabeth, New Jersey, in Union County. And so I mentioned that to Kai, and he's like, "The Family? Oh wait, yeah, that was the name of that cult that my mom was in." And then so at this point, in JPay, you can't just like read and start a letter below it like an email. So I keep a text document open that I start writing my response in usually. And I saw that, and I'm, oh my gosh, did they have like comics that look like Jack Chick tracks or something? Did they mention a law of love doctrine? Was there a guy named Father David, or did they call him Moses? Like, and sure enough, like I actually go down and finish reading, and he's going through like, well, they had these like weird comics, and there was this guy like David something or other, and it's like, oh my gosh, yes, this is. And it's so crazy to me because like I'd heard him mention it many times when he said like, this weird fundamentalist Christian cult. Like that could be all kinds of things. Like, I grew up in the rural South, and like, there's Pentecostal churches, and there's, and some of them get a little, there's snake handlers within like a 40-minute drive of where I grew up, So like there's all kinds of weird stuff like that. But like I had no idea. The Family, for people who aren't familiar, just horrendous. Like I I characterize them as a child sexual abuse cult because that's a lot of what they did. And I believe, along with Professor Ruth Wangerin at CUNY at CUNY, she also believes that they may have been used in COINTELPRO. I mean, like, how else do you explain the fact that they were constantly getting raided in Australia, in France, in the UK, in the US, and then they send the kids back, And also, they were always wherever the CIA was when the CIA and the Christian Social Democrats in the 70s, and the Family was there. Marcos in the Philippines, and the Family was there. And, also just like with the Finders cult, look at those passports. You shouldn't be able to go there unless you're like, connected to something, So yeah, like, that was another one of those like last minute, mind-blowing moments. Yeah, the Family cult. And Gilbert, his dad, was involved in the United Church of Canada, which at those residential schools, I mean, we've seen this stuff about like mass graves and stuff, but there's also kids getting like slapped in the ear and punched in the ear so hard they go deaf, and so many pedophile teachers and administrators at. I mean, think about it. It makes sense in a sick and twisted sort of way. You got a bunch of kids who've been kidnapped, essentially kidnapped by the government. They took them away from their parents and they put them in these schools. Well, you don't have any family to go to complain about the teacher's raping me, So yeah, I mean, like, it's, obviously not justified, but yeah, it does sort of make sense why that went rampant, why it was so, wild. So yeah, I mean, it makes me so mad that there's so much to this story that's worth telling, that needs to be told. And they wanted to focus like, an hour. They spent an hour listening to like, reality TV vultures. And then another like 20 minutes, they're like, we're just going to have the Union County. The one guy was like the media, what was it? The media liaison, or literally the PR agent for the prosecutor's office. And he's like, well, Kai was lying and we were right. I mean, yeah, that's what I was. If I was the PR agent for a crooked prosecutor's office, and Netflix came to me, I would be like, yeah, no, he's lying, But yeah, once again, it was that was irresponsible journalism. Like, even if they didn't know what they know, which I know they know because I told them, that would be irresponsible. But the fact that they did know, yeah, I mean, I call it occasionally a limited hangout. I don't mean to say that like someone connected to Galfie's behind it. I've got no evidence to that. But like, once again, like, as much as I've seen in this case and the stuff that crops up now, if we did find evidence of that, I'd be like, yeah, no, that figures, that makes sense. A lot of stuff is making more sense now with that piece of, yeah. but yeah, one last thing I definitely want to. This is an interesting little piece of the puzzle. So in one part in the documentary, you see a guy and he's got some clothes and hangers, and then there's a bag of, oh well, we don't know what's in the bag. And he ducks under the police tape, and he's in plain clothes, but he's got a walkie-talkie. And I haven't figured out who this guy is yet, but I am very pleased that they put that spot in there. I don't think they knew what they were doing, by the way. Now get this, that footage is from ABC 7 New York. I wanted that footage because I wanted to know, like the judge would not allow a still from that to be entered into evidence. You know why? He said they couldn't prove what day it was. It was the day that ABC 7 New York was there, and there was crime scene tape, and the cops were there. And see, that's a cop car. So it was the day that was going on. May 13th to 15th, 2013. We know that. So there's some reason he didn't want that entered, I believe. I can't prove that. I don't know that yet, but I'm going to find out. Because yeah, why wouldn't you want that entered into evidence? Well, maybe because it looks like that guy may be leaving with some evidence. I don't know. I'd like to know what was in that bag though. But yeah, no, I went to ABC 7 New York. Now, what the people from Raw TV and Netflix did is I'm sure they went over there and they're like, we're doing the hatchet wielding hitchhiker documentary, and here's $5,000. Can we license some of your B-roll? And they were like, yeah, sure. It's about the hatchet wielding hitchhiker. That sounds like a horror movie. It's not going to paint him in a good light, and you're giving us money too. Now, when I went to ABC 7 New York, I made a mistake. I played my hand. I said, hey, listen, I'm writing this book about Kai the Hitchhiker, and you are in possession of some footage that may be vital to his case. You know what they told me? They said, you'll have to subpoena us. Huh. Now, why were you so free with Netflix, but I would have to subpoena you? Now, I don't know, but once again, it does make me wonder, maybe, now, if I'd said, I'm writing the book, Kai, the serial killing, hatchet murdering, old people, evil guy, and I want a picture of, like, I do wonder if I'd been less specific about why I needed it, or whatever, because like that's an odd response, I think. Subpoena us, they said. But yeah, no, it's like I said, it's a wild story. It blows one of the wildest things about the story is the fact that I'm the only one telling it, or at least telling these portions of it, like the interesting parts. Like that's just what blows my mind. And the fact that there's so much interest in this story, even the expurgated, the bowdlerized, the censored version has got over 21 million hours of view time racked up. Oh man, imagine what people would do with the truth.
Yeah, it's crazy. And even I know, like, him being locked up in his room was kind of dismissed on the film, and at the time it didn't seem like, oh, that's a big deal. It's like they obviously the mother, like you said, was kind of acting like it wasn't a big deal, and even the film didn't make a big deal out of it. I mean, people forget, like, when you're a kid, the worst thing that ever happened to you is the worst thing that ever happened to you. Like,
right.
from a
Yeah.
if you're an adult and you've been through deaths in the family, who knows, like maybe a divorce, a bad car accident, maybe a medical issue, like those things seem like bigger deals. And then locking a kid in the room, it's like, what's the big deal? You'll just recover. But I wonder how much of that has to do with him hitchhiking, because that's the other thing, is like they didn't really go into too much about why he was hitchhiking. And do you know anything about like where he was going, or what, did he have any?
Oh yeah. Well, he'd at about like between 18 and 25, he was doing like construction and taking classes. He was gonna do forestry and paramedic and all this different kind of stuff. And yeah, the what you mentioned there, that's something I was talking to somebody else about. I do wonder if, like, the being oppressed and tied down, locked down, would kind of make you want to, like, always be able to just pick up stakes. Um, but yeah, that the abuse, like from early on, that definitely, I know, like, it affected him. He says that, like, after the Jet McBride incident, he was diagnosed with PTSD already. And I speak, I'll speak from experience here too, as somebody who's been diagnosed with PTSD. Yeah, like when stuff goes awry, it does take you just longer to, like, get back to a baseline. um so yeah, the abuse and whatnot, yes, it's absolutely, like, incredibly important to the situation, how he would behave in certain situations, etc. um and like, as far as his opinion on predators, for instance, like, whether it's Jet McBride or whoever, like, he's talked about, like, from what he's told me, he wasn't a guy who looked for a fight, but he was also one who wouldn't back down if somebody was bullying somebody else, or trying to hurt someone who was smaller. And yeah, I absolutely, like, okay, when terrible things happen to you, some people are able to just, like, turn off their empathy, and they can become monsters. Some people, however, when terrible things happen to them, I think it inspires even more empathy. And I believe that's what happened with me. I, I've got uncomfortable empathy a lot of the times. It's not fun. But I would, how to put this? Here we go. Okay, I'm glad that there's not a button I can press to get rid of my empathy and compassion. Because if it was that easy, I probably would have already pressed it, like, a long time ago, during, like, one of those times. But seeing as I don't have that button, thumbs up.
Yeah, it's so fascinating. And these stories, I mean, that's the thing about lawsuits and the justice system. It's like it's all rigged. I mean, lawyers all know each other. They do. I mean, a lot of times, y- what what ends up getting you out of jail or in jail is how much resources you have and who you know.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, do you have enough?
Yep.
Here's a good, I know people.
Capital punishment. If you don't have the capital, you getting punished. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. I know people who've had like 3, 4 DUIs and are still driving, and it's like, oh, I know this good attorney. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, and then I know people who were barely over the limit and were just at the wrong place at the wrong time. Cop pulls them over, and or they go through one of these sobriety test zones where they check every car, and then next thing you know, they lose their license, and they lose their job, and it's all downhill from there. They have to go to AA meetings, even though
Mm-hmm.
they're just. I mean, which is insane, but that's a whole nother discussion. But yeah, but it's like it's kind of silly. People who are like they pretend that the whole system's fair and balanced and it's about locking up the criminal. It's like, no, it's not about locking up the criminals. It's about who you know.
Mm-hmm.
It's about can you afford the best lawyer? Can you
Yep.
lawyer that knows the judge, who has a relationship with the judge? That's what it's so. And there's story after story after story of people getting locked up who shouldn't be there. I mean, the vice president of the United States of America, she notoriously would lock up innocent people, and
Mm-hmm.
there's tons of, I mean, people haven't gone down that rabbit hole. Please do. I mean, she was not a good person. I mean, Hillary Clinton, right? Remember, uh,
Super predators.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Uh-huh.
So it's just they're so they don't have a moral compass. They could care less, and I mean, to be an attorney, you almost have to not have a moral compass. You can't even do your job correctly or properly if you care about who's right or who's wrong or who.
Yeah.
It's you.
And there's the letter of the law, and there's the spirit of the law. And the thing about the spirit of the law is, with a good enough with a good enough lawyer, he'll find the loopholes where the spirit don't even matter anymore. That's in, like I said, the fact that Kai's argument took 9 years to get a federal judge to say, no, no, you put the semicolon in the right place, because that's what happened. Like, he was making the same argument 9 years straight, It's just that then the lawyers would be like, oh, well, according to blah, blah, blah versus blah, 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 he put that in the wrong form. And even though, like, if you're pro se, if you're representing yourself, they're supposed to like give you some leeway, but you're still up against the other team's lawyers. So, like, if you write something slightly wrong, they'll be like, well, I think you meant this, but the lawyers, like, until you've vanquished the other team's lawyers and they're, where they literally can't just say, oh, well, you didn't dot your T, or whatever, cross the T, dot the I. Yeah. And the law should not work that way. It shouldn't work, like the one thing I keep thinking, the law should not work like Jumanji, where like, or Abracadabra. Oh no, I pronounced it wrong, and now the Evil Dead or the Necronomicon has brought back the Evil Dead. That's not how the law should work. And the idea of all are equal before the law is absolutely made nullified when, like you said, no, we are all entitled to as much justice as we can afford to purchase at fair market value.
Well, and it's funny because I remember when I was growing up and finding out how many politicians used to be attorneys, and I'm like, oh, that makes perfect sense because they complex the shit out of, the tax code and the laws and all that type of stuff. So the average person can't take advantage of it. But the people who went to the, expensive university, or the person who can afford the best attorneys or the best CPAs can take advantage of the complexity and know where all the loopholes are. All this stuff. So it's like it helps them and hurts the average person. So it's without a doubt. But hopefully this interview will bring, because the books, is it available to
right now, if you go to truestorykai.com, you can get same day digital purchase or print pre-orders. And let's see, I think we got it uploaded Thursday or Friday at Ingram Sparks, and it's like 3 to 5 business days, I believe. So I am, fingers crossed by this weekend, we will hopefully have links up at Amazon and other online retailers. And as far as the Indiegogo goes, as soon as I have print copies in hand, one of the perks there, you get a signed copy. Like, so if you want a copy, you want a signed copy, you can get that right now. But yeah, so truestoryofkai.com has got, the link to the Indiegogo, link to my previous articles. There's a how to help Kai link, which goes to his link tree, his petitions, his fundraiser, all the social media links, his YouTube channel, and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, it's kind of like the evidence locker is very valuable. That's got all the crime scene photos, exhibits, evidence, court transcripts, all that kind of stuff. So everything that's in the book. And speaking of, in fact, don't want to forget this. There are 3 sample chapters you can read or download as PDF on the site right now too.
Awesome. And how many, if you don't mind me asking, like, have you had a lot of interactions with Kai? Like a lot of?
Oh yeah. I did my first interview. I did 3 interviews recorded over the phone back in 2017, and that's when I wrote "Massive Miscarriage of Justice" in the Kai the Hitchhiker case at the Inquisitor. And since then, yeah, we've pretty much just kept in touch. And that's something that I bring up in the book. Like, there's a spot in the appendix for it even. I know, like, classic, like, oh well, you got to be, you should be objective and you don't get attached to your subject. And it's like, well, he's not a subject, he's a person. And as far as objectivity, everybody is biased. The trick is then to be aware of your biases and then to compensate for them, which I've tried to do. Anything that that Kai says that there's not physical evidence or corroboration for, Kai says, or Kai tells me. Anything that I can't prove, I don't say it's so. And I make sure that whenever I am, pointing to where the evidence suggests something, that I'm saying that the evidence suggests it, not that this is so. That's something else that, definitely before we hop off here, a couple things I want to bring home to everybody. I did an interview with a podcast. These two ladies, real sweet ladies, and they reached out to me because they just gotten blasted for misinformation or whatever. And like, yeah, they might have gotten like a couple of minor things wrong. It was nothing like huge, and definitely not like the kind of like where the misrepresentation is like leading to false conclusions, like a lot of the stuff I've called out. Not only that though, but apparently they were in Kai's corner already, and so like that, and like have had people send me like a TikTok video or this or that, and there's some stuff that okay, if we can't prove it, don't say it's so. You can provide evidence or whatever, but it's not going to help us to, make claims that we can't prove. Like, somebody's saying that I saw somebody say, oh, Joseph Galfy raped 5 boys in 1987 and Joseph Galfy had GHB in his freezer. Okay, I wondered about that because it says there is a container with liquid that was clear in the freezer. And like it could be vodka. It could be vodka. And if this guy didn't give off creepy Ed Buck vibes, I would of course assume it's vodka. But it does make me wonder. But we don't have that bottle anymore, apparently. We can't test it. So we can't say conclusively GHB. That we're no better than them. We're warping the narrative and misrepresenting the story like them if we do that. So remember to be polite, folks. Don't jump on people's heads. I get it. Like, I was involved in creative activism, and people, when they get passionate about something, and they're used to people like, shouting them down or whatever, sometimes you just expect somebody to, and you might unintentionally spark something. So be polite, be informed, be respectful, like that's how we're going to win this thing.
Yeah, that's right. I think last time you were on, we talked about Kratom slightly because I have done a podcast on it with Chris Bell, who did a Leaf of Faith.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, which was and it was great because he ended up going on the Rogan podcast to get some attention on it because, of course, if anything is a natural remedy, they have to demonize it. So he trying to make it illegal, even though it's been used throughout the world for many years. So it's that's a fascinating story too. But yeah, I mean, without a doubt, and being biased, I mean, a lot of times, I mean, you're a very intelligent guy. You maybe you're biased because that's where the evidence is going. I mean, because you could be biased either way, right? You could be biased in that you think that he's definitely guilty and he's this awful person, or you could be biased as maybe he's not getting his fair due in court. So it's like, why are you biased? It's like, well, you're biased because you're investigating this, you're looking at all the evidence and information and the story. And then it's leading you down a path. But even then, like you said, like it's smart to know that, like, okay, I am being, right now my opinions are, more for Kai than against Kai, but I'm open to the idea that maybe that might change. And
yeah. I mean, like, this is something I've told Kai too. Like, I'm doing him no favors if I don't, you scour the story. Like, I can't just take him at his word on things. That's that's just not how evidence works, and that wouldn't help him. Just saying, well, Kai says, what will help is convincingly showing the evidence that at least the evidence that evidence was tampered with, which is some of the most compelling evidence is not so much what's there, but like I said, where we can see this was collected but not tested, this was never collected and never tested, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, without a doubt. So make sure to send me links to all those things.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
If you're Indiegogo, anything that you have going on, anything that you want in the show description, please send it to me. And then once it's available on Amazon, also send me that link, because if the show's not out, make sure to
absolutely
do that. Or I can always update the show description later if I already released the show by that time. But definitely check out his work. Philip's always interesting, always fascinating. I mean, the timing was just so. I mean, we've been my wife and I, we haven't actually watched a documentary in a while. We've been we've been watching Ted Lasso, which is actually really, really funny. And so people kept asking me to check it out, and I'm a big soccer fan, so I'm like, you know what, let me check. And it was actually pretty funny. So and then we were looking for something else to watch, and what just happened, and that was what we watched. And like soon after, you emailed me, and I'm like, perfect timing because it's fresh in my brain
Nice.
and whatnot. And but I'm glad that you're releasing a book while this story is still hot, because
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
hopefully it brings more attention to your work and your book. And I mean, it's similar to it reminds me of Whitney Webb a little bit, where Whitney's been around for a little bit, but because her Jeffrey Epstein, that once that Jeffrey Epstein story got really hot and everybody got intrigued with it, all of a sudden, her work got much more attention. So hopefully this will bring some much earned attention to
Appreciate.
all the years of writing. And I'm actually surprised too, because you said that first time you talked to him was 2017. So
Mhm.
you've been on
Oh yeah.
for
Yeah.
a long time.
Yep.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, because like I said, I've never even heard of this story or Kai at all.
Yeah, yeah. A friend of mine, Rachel, she's a nurse in Tennessee, and I remember her. She messaged me one day. She knew I write for Inquisitor at the time, and she's like, "Hey, you need to check out this Kai the Hitchhiker story." And she sent me the link to the Facebook page and everything. And so from there on, I'm like, okay. So reach out, find out how to get in contact with them, a couple of calls, and yeah, sure enough, I mean, like, you know uh, that's one of those. This is one of those stories that I'm going to be covering as long as I write. And I hope that Kai will be freed, but that's not going to get Union County off the hook. I'm sorry, y'all already made my list. There's nothing you do to get off the list once you've made the list. You can let Kai out. You can pay the millions for the civil suit that you owe, and none of it'll be enough. None of it will be enough. But there's nothing that Union County can do to get off of my radar now, because it's just that they've become interesting to me.
I've had a TJ English on some years ago, and he writes a lot about mob and organized crime and cartels and all this stuff. And I feel like he's because when the Union County started being mentioned, I'm like, this sounds familiar. Like I've heard somebody discuss it before, and I know that he was on Rogan's podcast before. I don't know if it was before or after he was on my podcast. I believe it was before, and he was with Joey Diaz, who's from New Jersey,
Mhm.
and they talk about some of the corruption and stuff in New Jersey. So now I feel like I'm gonna have to go back and see, if he's mentioned it, and maybe I can get another perspective on some of the corruption that goes on in New Jersey. But yeah, fascinating, definitely fascinating. That's kind of one of the fun things about going down these rabbit holes is you
Oh yeah.
find many other rabbit holes.
Yep.
But thanks again, Philip. It's nice to know that you're back in the States, because it makes booking much easier with the
Oh yeah, that's true. Yeah, the time difference was a little difficult for sure.
and I'll send you links to the show once it's up and live, and I'll definitely share it everywhere and anywhere, and hopefully people go out, check out the book, support his work, and I'm sure we'll talk again in the near future.
Oh, thanks so much. You
Thanks,
have a
Phil.
great day.
Have the rest of your day. Take care.
You too.